Welcome to the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Each week, we talk with accomplished content strategy experts to share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. And now here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 31 of the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Shelley Keith. Shelley's a digital strategist at Modern Tribe, a digital agency that helps people put their websites and other stuff together. So I'll have Shelley tell you just a little bit more about herself.
Thanks, Larry. So my role at Modern Tribe is digital strategist, which essentially means I'm a professional generalist. I work with a really amazing team of developers, project managers, designers to build enterprise WordPress implementations. It's pretty much where our focus is. And my background, I've been working on the web since like 1994. I came out of hosting and development and have worked in higher ed for about 15 years before I moved to Modern Tribe. So
Great.
I've done this my entire professional career.
94. That's going back there. I remember that. That was just I think Mosaic came out the year before or something. Yeah. So.
I have very fond Netscape Navigator memories.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, the good old days. Well, the first thing, so we want to talk today about content governance. And you do that in the context of your overall digital strategy role at Modern Tribe. First of all, a lot of people, when I say the word governance, a lot of people just kind of their eyes roll back in their head or they have this curious look on their face. Can you help them out and can you just define content governance for us? Yeah.
So basically my definition is ensuring that the site is working for the institution by effectively stewarding resources for optimal outcomes. So getting what you need, where you need it, when you need it. I know that a lot of the definitions out there are really around kind of accountability and roles and authority and processes. And a lot of times, and those things are important, but a lot of the work I do kind of simplifies that a little bit to what is it going to take to make this an effective web presence?
I love that. That's a very pragmatic approach, which probably works most places, I'm going to guess. Can you talk about it like a typical implementation? Like we were talking a little bit before we went on the air about it's not all about just policies and procedures and manuals and stuff. That it's really about actually getting actual adherence to the things that you want to have happen.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how you help make that happen?
So my approach is pretty interesting because usually what I'm working with is organizations that just don't have the resources to do big formal governance plan with all of the requirements and documentation and all of those things. So a lot of times what I work on more than those things is finding ways to build opportunities to empower users. And do that in the direction that you need them to go. So thinking about essentially it's a stewardship model. We're building conscientious stewards with clarity and awareness of not only institutional goals and kind of where they're supposed to be going, but also building in some kind of whys on that, like why accessibility is important, how SEO ties to their content and, accessibility and all of those things. So tying together not only the things that stakeholders care about, like their search results, but also finding ways to kind of make them aware of and make them care about other things that are really important to the institution.
Right. There's a lot of ways you can do that. I guess. Is it training? Is it how do you get that across? So
it does tend to be training. My approach is very much about training, and I build training in a way that ties a lot of things to accessibility, ties a lot of things to SEO, and because outcomes are kind of where stakeholders care, you can take just about anything and tell the story in a way that makes SEO and accessibility important.
Interesting.
Right?
The way you said that, like you said, things that stakeholders care about, SEO. It's like, is that sort of a top level consideration for a lot of your clients?
Yeah, and a lot of this approach came around from some work I was doing in higher ed, and I don't know how much of your audience is higher ed, but I think a lot of people can relate. We had a lot of internal stakeholders who were really unhappy with the outcomes of search results around their programs, and they were really unhappy with internal search results around their programs. And basically kind of training these users that search results are not this magic black box that the web department has the ability to just make magically better. It's all about the content and making sure that you're paying attention to and thinking about your users. So it was fairly easy to take all of the message architecture and all the marketing work and the branding work and data about search engine result, SEO, and then tie it to accessibility and create a training program that not only helped them achieve the goals that they were going for, but also helped the institution work on things like compliance.
Got it. Yeah, that's it. So, and that would be more around the accessibility stuff, I assume, the compliance part of it.
Well, and compliance is, in this case, a lot of it was accessibility, because accessibility is this kind of this magical ticket that a lot of people don't understand. But if you're a good storyteller, you can make a lot of things relate back to accessibility. And in reality, a lot of things do link back to accessibility. So Google penalizes you for bad accessibility, for non-standard code, for bad content, for all of those things. So being able to tie a legislative requirement, essentially 508, and the outcome that they're going for, which is better search engine results, which is better, whatever participation in the programs, together made for a pretty great training. Now, compliance was style guide. Compliance is writing for the web. Compliance is a lot of things in a kind of a bucket.
Right.
But again, writing for the web is even one of those things that you can easily tie back to accessibility. Here's the right way to do this. Blocking, chunking, all the kind of super basics that benefit accessibility and also benefit SEO.
Right. And all those, I can picture how the three of those, there's kind of three things you mentioned: the accessibility issue, the findability on your internal search, whatever mechanism is, and then the SEO, the discoverability and appeal to Google and the other search engines. So the training you do, is it about, you mentioned that there's a writing component to it, but there's also there's different kind of technical and semantic and other things you have to do for each of those goals, like accessibility and findability and SEO. What's the scope of this training, I guess, is what
so I built out training that you have to get through you kind of have to get through the why. Why are these things important, and why am I doing these things, and how are they going to help me, before you get into how. And by that, I mean, how practically does this happen in the CMS? How do I make sure that images have alt tags? How do I put headers in place in my page content? All of those things. That comes after, because 99% of the time, your stakeholders who are going to be managing web content just really want to get the CMS. And if you let them, before you have them trained on what good means, or what the right way is and why it's the right way, then you're going to have issues. So that was one of our kind of, it's really important to get them through the why and to build accountability by sending them through a why training, the why training. And it's one of those things, setting them through the why before handing them the how just makes for better outcomes, right? And you can't make everybody care about everything, but it does at least, I said, build accountability. You now have this group of people who know better.
Gotcha. You
right?
just raised an interesting management issue. Right? Just imagining in my head, like you don't have to care, but you have to know. but I wonder,
Right.
but knowing that why, I wonder like how often people get like they're like, oh, I do believe in that, and I do believe in why we're doing this, and really want to do it, or maybe they go get another job, or I don't know. It's do you how? But I think the bigger point there, and the 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 general principle that seems to work is once you know the why, it's sort of like having an overarching policy or a vision that makes everything kind of unfold more gracefully underneath it. The why is that same kind of mechanism, right?
Right, absolutely. And I just forgot exactly what I was going to say there.
Oh, no worries. Hey,
So
but
you edit that out.
I want to jump around a little bit anyway, because you had mentioned a minute ago, like one of the things you teach about is style guides and things like that. One of the ways I've had when I think about governance and talk to other people about governance, a lot of people are helped by just sort of having a list of deliverables. Like, okay, what's a governance program going to give me? Am I going to end up with a style guide, a voice and tone guide, or what are the typical? Like you said that you're often working not so much off of a bunch of documents and things like that, but what are the areas, I guess, or the components of a good governance program?
Well, I don't want to say good, but a kind of pragmatic and functional governance program in an environment where you don't have a lot of resources and don't have, and by that I really mean like human resources. You don't have a lot of people to oversee what's going on the website, and you have to rely on a variety of other duties as assigned kind of folks to do content management. I think that it's really it's a very clear understanding of where you're coming from and where you're going, like what your goals are with the website. And this is all one of the things I do want to say is your governance plan can't come at, well, I mean, it can, but it's very much harder to bring that in as kind of an afterthought, right? Oh, how are we going to manage this? Who's going to do what? That kind of thing it's a bad idea to try to do that afterwards, although it's better to do it afterwards than to never do it at all. But I really, we use all of the research that gets done in a project. We're digging through analytics. We're looking at accessibility reports. We're basically going and finding any data that we can to start to create desired outcomes. Where are we trying to get to? And then build kind of a plan and training around those things. So if you're an organization that you've got excessive outdated content, you've got accessibility issues and with all of the accessibility complaints that have been filed in the last couple of years, it's a really kind of hot button issue. Take all of those kind of data points, Alexa comparables with other organizations that are the same, and start to measure progress and success. And some of those measurements are broken links and spelling errors, right? Which are absolutely kind of content governance issues. And just kind of figure out where you're trying to go. And then from there, figure out what you need to do to get there, and put together a plan. And oftentimes it just keeps coming back to the basics. It keeps coming back to making sure that people have clarity and awareness on that there is a right way. There are a lot of right ways. There are a lot of wrong ways. Here's the right way that we're going to go. And point them in that direction and give them some tools to make good decisions.
Got it. And that sort of happens at the, well, that kind of gets into another question I wanted to ask you about. That sort of gets into like how each unit that's creating content is managing its folks and doing all that. So that kind of makes me think also about the scope of governance, of governance of content. You're kind of like, there must be people who are creating or informing your content that are in other parts of the organization that aren't directly under the purview of a content person. How does that scope, how does that ripple out, I guess, from the central content activities in an organization?
I think my approach, what we've done in the past, is essentially designed for exactly that scenario. Um, what I say very often is we can't control everything in these environments. That's part of the resourcing issue. You don't have the ability to police the whole site. You have to give people the tools to do the right thing, and then try to keep touching base with them, try to keep relationships going, but you can't. Workflows in a lot of those environments, workflows are a terrible idea because you'll just bottleneck and you'll never get anything out the door, right? You'll never be able to accomplish anything.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because that's like such a classic tool for managing the creation and of content. How do workflows fail in those situations?
If you've got 250 content contributors across campus and you've got one or two people who can approve content or approve changes, then you have very quickly got a bottleneck.
Gotcha.
And that really strains relationships. And it's very easy in what I call a highly democratic environment, such as a university. It's really easy to let that bottleneck become a point of contention and cause problems with kind of your C-suite relationships.
Gotcha.
Because they're hearing a lot of people complain about stuff on the website, and that's not a hill that I've been willing to die on in the past. Like, there's so many other places where energy should be spent, and the part of the goal of training in this scenario is to make those people responsible, and to tie those responsibilities to reasons that are relevant to the institution through, like I said, through legislative requirements, through strategic plans, through whatever you can tie things to give them kind of weight.
Gotcha. Hey, and that what you were just saying about like the bottleneck when you have like 2 or 3 approvers and 250 creators, that gets what you mentioned the word pragmatism a couple of times, and you've also talked about how important the people stuff is, the stakeholder relationships. Like, so I'm just picturing, like, you've done this a while. How do you anticipate and deal with that? Like, how can you help people avoid that problem
of struggling with relationships?
Because, well, when how do you, because you've seen that, you're like, I'm just picturing you now as you work with a project going like, I see this problem of 250 contributors and two approvers looming. How do you nip that in the bud?
Very carefully. And how that gets done depends entirely on the politics and culture at an institution. So it's not like you can go the same direction, but how you get there is not going to be the same for everyone. And basically, it's just a matter of kind of lots of conversations, pulling the key stakeholders, the project's points into meetings and having conversations about how their culture works and figuring out what will work to kind of head this off at the pass early on, and having a plan in place and communicating that plan out to the rest of campus, to all of these content contributors as the project goes on. And kind of I am really big on transparency, but I'm really big on intentional transparency. So making sure that the right message is getting out to the people who need to hear it, so that you're minimizing kind of surprises and the angst around change. And mind you, the biggest chunk of this is you're dealing with a whole lot of people who don't have web in their title, don't have any formal training necessarily. This is other duties as assigned, so they're already probably overwhelmed, and this is just one more thing. And when you start trying to layer on governance, it just becomes this like PR nightmare. Everybody gets really stressed out about it. And if you're in an institution and you need support and buy-in, it's all about the story that you tell.
Yeah. No, and everything you're talking about there's two things that keep coming up over and over again in these interviews. It's like that everything is bespoke, that every organization, every entity, every individual is unique, and you got to figure that out and account for that in your content strategy. And the other thing is that it's all about people, in relationships, and those two things make for a very interesting governance environment, it sounds like. Yeah. I wanted to also ask you so that kind of gets the I love your pragmatic approach to this, and that it's all about that, like figuring out those people relationships and things that have to happen. Are there places or are there situations in which there's more like, not, I don't want to say like enforcement or compliance, but there must be situations where it just as push comes to shove and there has to be like a decision made. I guess, are there, how do you build in things like that, like points at which it makes sense to go to a decider or an owner of an initiative to make sure things are happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why things are tied to strategic plans and kind of cabinet level dictations, for lack of a better word, and things like accessibility, things that you have kind of a line in the sand on some stuff. This is why we have to do these things this way. I also I call this, because this is kind of a non-invasive approach to governance, the way that the training and all of that stuff. But I kind of think of this as guerrilla governance as well, because it's not, especially when I was working in an institution, it's not beyond me to, depending on what the thing is, to do like guerrilla A/B testing, secret A/B testing, to show that something is not as effective as they think it is when it's the thing that they want to do. I have very few hills that I'm willing to die on. I will let you fail yourself. I will do everything I can, but then I'm not gonna force you to succeed if you're absolutely against success in a scenario. But I will. There are a couple places, and accessibility is one of them. We are going to be accessible. We are going to structure our content well. We are going to be supportive and inclusive of everyone who could possibly be interacting with the institution's website. And that is the place where I will draw the line and absolutely not budge off of it. And that has gotten me, because again, like I was saying in the beginning, you can get a long way with accessibility by, this will be more accessible. This doesn't pass, basic accessibility testing. This is, your headers are in the wrong order, whatever, because things like, oh, I want this header to be this size. I don't want the H2 size. I want the H4 size. So I'm going to nest these weird. And those kind of really super basic things can have a big impact. So that's kind of, really, accessibility tends to be the one place that I will draw a line in the sand. And this is, we're not going past that.
No, and that's good. That's a good technique too. I as you were talking, I'm like, I hope she writes the guerrilla governance how-to guide or something, because you're just looking, because that's like one of those points you identify and say, okay, accessibility. I've got legal authority. I've got a lot of support. It's a hot topic right now. I can use that as leverage to get better semantic structure for my content, which is so important for other things.
Right, and it's one of the things that I talk about in my workshops is that we're the experts, especially in a campus environment, oftentimes in any organization where we are. Those of us who've been doing it for a long time, we are the experts. So figure out what you need to do to get to whatever your goal is, and then begin to tell that story. And that's, I think, I want to empower people in these roles to stand up and be heard and help move the web forward, right?
Right. You're a Karen McGrain fan then?
I am a huge
Yeah, okay, everybody is. But yeah, I just had to, I think I work her name into every episode somehow, it seems like. Hey, I noticed we're coming up close to time. I always like to, well, actually, let me ask one other thing, because a couple things you've mentioned get at the bigger scope of governance, like this notion that that you have that leverage of laws and things about accessibility that govern that. But there's also the bigger conceptual thing of how the content governance fits into the overall like governance plan for, especially in these big institutions you're operating in. Are there insights about that, or things that you've identified where, or is there anything you have to say about that, about how content governance fits into overall governance in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, the website is the single most prolific, I guess, piece of material out there in the world. It is the thing that more people see about your organization than anything else. It's the first place people go. So whatever your organizational goals are, whatever kind of whatever you do, whatever your sales goals are, whatever your admissions goals are, whatever those things are, and whoever you are as an organization needs to be reflected in that. So web content is not this kind of standalone, tucked away kind of bonus. Your content is who you are. So more so than sometimes the people you're sending out to have conversation, like your sales folks, like your website is who you are to a lot of people. They're the gateway to getting conversations even start. It's the gateway to getting conversations started. So it's not this kind of optional thing. It's maybe the most important thing that you do to start conversations.
No, that makes perfect sense, because that's the first way that I think most people find out about any entity now. Like, yeah. Hey, we're coming up on time, Shelley. I always like to give my guests a chance, if there's anything last, anything I haven't brought up or that we haven't talked about, or even just anything that's on your mind about the web or content strategy, any crackpot theories, anything like that. But anything last that you'd like to share with our folks?
Yeah, I just kind of want to talk about storytelling for a second. And I think that everybody needs to think about this instead of all the policies and procedures that we need to get in place. Think about telling your story in ways that are valuable to the outcomes that you're going for. And in a lot of cases, that's taking the realities of whatever your current situation is to the C-suite, the higher level, the president's council, whatever, and talking about the real issues, because they're hearing a lot of things about people being crabby about the website, for one reason or another, but taking them some real data and telling the story around that data in a way that says, hey, here are the real issues, we can fix that. For instance, we have all of these broken links, spelling errors, accessibility problems, but these aren't redesign issues. These are content strategy issues, because we've got 250 people touching the website who've never had any training. And that's why we've got content that's literally 10 years old and not been touched. And we've got 150,000 pages because people just keep building new stuff and not doing anything with the old stuff and all of these things. And here's how it's affecting here's how it's affecting the brand. Here's what it looks like to new people coming in, who are coming in, 75% of whom are not coming in to the homepage, which is the only page that anybody actually seems to care about, but is one of the, it's not really the most important piece of content out there. So I probably can't stress enough the value of storytelling in building a successful governance program.
That's great. One of the questions I didn't get to is I was going to ask you about the benefits of having a content strategy and having a governance program, and that's it right there. It's like it gives you the everything you just said about broken links and spelling errors, mm-hmm. and all the stuff that reflects poorly on you, all the bloated content and all that stuff. To have a plan for dealing with that is a huge benefit.
It is, and I build baselines and show success and talk about that every time that you can, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels. You can go talk about all the great things you're doing, but if you can't show success, then everybody else's opinion is as good as yours.
I'll put a note on the show notes. Just skip ahead to the 29th minute and just build baseline, show success. That's all you need to know. Well, thanks so much, Shelley. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another content strategy interview.